We begin with some updates from West Asia as part of a second hostage exchange under the initial phase of a ceasefire agreement with Israel. Hamas has released 4 Israeli women hostages whose names it released on Friday from Gaza. Clutching Hamas-branded gift bags and wearing military fatigue, the 4 Israeli hostages, Karina Ariev, Daniela Gilboa, Naama Levi, and Liri Albag, were handed over by Hamas to the Red Cross. They waved and gave thumbs up as they were paraded on stage before dozens of militants and a huge crowd. Hundreds of Gaza residents who gathered to watch the scene responded with cheers before the women were escorted to the waiting Red Cross vehicles. The Israeli military said the women were then transferred back into Israel, where they were reunited with their families. All the 4 women were captured on October 7th, 2023, during Hamas's attack on the Nahal Oz military base. These women were reportedly serving as IDF surveillance soldiers. Before the release, Hamas and Red Cross signed agreement ahead of the release of hostages. Dozens of masked and armed militants from the Hamas and the Islamic Jihad gathered in Gaza City for the handover of the hostages. People cried tears of joy at Tel Aviv Square as Israelis watched the release of hostages. People also gathered with photos of female hostages who have been released. Soon after the release of the hostages, buses carrying Palestinian prisoners freed as part of the Gaza ceasefire and hostage release deal departed from 2 Israel prisons. The buses left Ofer prison in the occupied West Bank. Israel has confirmed 200 Palestinians held in Israeli jails have been released in return for 4 Israeli women hostages, all of them soldiers, freed earlier Saturday by Hamas. However, Israel has said it would block the return of displaced Palestinians to their homes in northern Gaza until civilian woman hostage Arbel Yehud is released.
We are continuing to progress with the implementation of the agreement for the return of the female and male hostages, and we are prepared and await with responsibility to receive all female and male hostages that are set to return in the near future. Hamas did not comply with the agreement on its obligation to return civilian females first.
Hamas sources have, however, said Yehud is safe and in good health. However, the ceasefire itself, brokered after months of negotiations, has not been enough to halt the violence entirely. While Gaza experienced a temporary pause in hostilities, violence continued to flare in the West Bank. Israeli security forces have been conducting airstrikes and ground operations in Jenin, a stronghold of militant groups. In the latest, an Israeli drone strike killed 2 people in the town of Kabatia. According to the Palestinian Health Ministry, at least 14 people have been killed since the Israeli operation began earlier this week. Daniel Rubenstein is a current Israeli citizen spokesperson and former advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He was also an advisor to former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett. Is joining us live on this broadcast. Mr. Rubenstein, thank you very much for making time for us and welcome to the broadcast. There have been several setbacks ever since the ceasefire deal was orchestrated and it is now in operation. We are seeing setbacks from both sides, if you may, because Israel says that Hamas is not adhering to the deal. They had requested Hamas to release 5 female soldiers, but Hamas released 4. What happens if one side, or if both sides, do not adhere to this deal?
Thank you for having me. It's not at all a surprise that Hamas is not keeping to the terms of the deal by the letter, and the reason that it's not a surprise is because Hamas is a barbaric terrorist army whose stated mission is to fight Israel until Israel is destroyed. What's happening now is a ransom payment. Israel has agreed to pay an enormous ransom to Hamas in order to receive hostages home after more than 15 months. As part of the deal, Hamas agreed to release Israeli civilians first before releasing Israeli soldiers. There is an Israeli civilian woman who remains in captivity. Hamas did not release her today, and Israel pointed it out that Hamas did not release her And Hamas is now saying, okay, we'll release her next week. But of course, if Hamas is not going to keep to the deal, then of course Israel will be slow to implement its requirements under the deal. And that's what we're seeing is happening. But in the meantime, today, we saw 4 Israeli women return from captivity. We had seen no sign of life from them for 15 months. They did not receive a single visit from the Red Cross. Hamas used them in order to demand an enormous ransom, which today they are receiving in the form of around 200 convicted Palestinian terrorists. These are people in Israeli jails who carried out barbaric crimes. Their release has been demanded by Hamas, and the payment is coming now.
Mr. Rubenstein, what do you make of the ongoing operation in Jenin? Because there has been a concern that regardless of the hostilities being halted in Gaza, there is some form of hostility going on in the West Bank, which is not being seen by the world as a good sign coming from Israel.
The war that Hamas started on October 7th, 2023 from Gaza did not remain a war from Gaza entirely. It became an 8-front war. Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, the Iranian regime itself, Yemen, and also attacks on Jews around the world. These accelerated from October 7th, 2023. And so what you're seeing in the West Bank is a continuation of the war that Hamas started. In the West Bank, Hamas remains popular. There are cells of terrorist organizations in Palestinian cities where the local Palestinian government has not been able to crack down on them due to their own weakness. So we have lots of terrorists in the West Bank who are plotting attacks against Israeli civilians, and the Israeli public is not going to sit and wait for these terrorists to carry out an attack before acting to stop them. So this is what I would call a common sense operation to stop people from carrying out murders on your own citizens.
Mr. Rubenstein, as we end this conversation, I want your views on the deal. How fruitful do you think, or do you believe, do you have any hopes in the deal, becoming fruitful for both Israel and Palestine and Gaza?
I do not see how this deal can lead to a permanent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, because Hamas in Gaza is the government, and the policy of the Hamas government of Gaza is to fight Israel until Israel is destroyed. So Hamas believes that anywhere, anytime, it has the right to carry out horrific atrocities against Israel. That's why it exists. That's why it's popular. And until the entire international community understands that Hamas cannot remain the government of Gaza, I think we're going to be stuck in the same situation we find ourselves. And I hope that more people will understand that Hamas cannot be the government of Gaza. And if we want to build a better future for Israeli and Palestinian children alike, we need a responsible government in Gaza that chooses peace instead of war.
All right, Mr. Daniel Rubenstein, as always, thank you very much for your time and for talking to us today.
Thank you for having me.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.